This story explores the complexities of impatience, its potential advantages, and its consequences. It delves into a world where the masses suffer under the oppressive rule of greedy and power-hungry individuals who exploit the vulnerable and hoard wealth for their unborn children. It also shed light on the manipulation of religious leaders who prey on the gullible and naive. Ultimately, this narrative questions whether impatience, though seemingly detrimental, could hold the key to overcoming such oppressive systems. Chapter 1: A Harmless Quirk. In a small village nestled amidst rolling hills lived a peculiar dog named Vinny. Unlike other dogs who basked in patience, Vinny possessed a boundless energy and an impatient nature. He would bark incessantly at squirrels, tug at his leash with an almost human-like frustration, and eagerly anticipate meal times with a constant tail wag. While other dogs would calmly wait for their owners to finish their chores, Vinny would impatiently paw at their legs, demanding attention. The villagers often chuckled at Vinny's impatience, viewing it as a harmless quirk. They had grown accustomed to his boisterous nature, an incessant barrage of barks that accompanied his every movement. But little did they know that Vinny's impatience held a secret advantage, one that would soon be revealed to them all. Chapter 2: Bat Gebogena. The village, like many others, was under the iron grip of a ruthless politician named Bat Gebogena. He had amassed a colossal fortune for himself and his family, leaving the villagers to struggle in poverty. His opulent mansion stood as a symbol of their suffering, its towers reaching for the heavens while the villagers toiled in the field, their faces itched with despair. But Gebogena had no qualms about exploiting the villagers. He manipulated their needs, forcing them to work for meager wages and paying exorbitant taxes. His power was absolute. His reign of terror spread a sense of fear and helplessness amongst the villagers. They were trapped in a vicious circle of poverty and oppression, their hopes and dreams slowly fading away. Heart as cold as the marble. But Gebogena was a man of insatiable greed. His hunger for power and wealth knew no bounds. He had cunningly amassed his fortune through corrupt practices, exploiting the vulnerability of the villagers. His relentless pursuit for wealth had blinded him to the suffering he inflicted on the people he ruled. He had built his opulent mansion using stolen labor and resources of the villagers. His walls were adorned with extravagant paintings and tape stripes. His floors were covered in the finest Persian rugs, and his servants catered for his every whim. He lived in a world of opulence and excess, while the villagers he ruled struggled to survive on bare minimum. His heart was as cold as the marble floor he walked upon. His soul was as empty as the coffers he filled. He saw the villagers as mere pawns in his game of power, and their life expendable in his pursuit for wealth and glory. The only currency he recognized was gold, and the only language he understood was power. The justice system. But Gebogena's status were as ruthless as his ambition. He employed a network of spies to infiltrate the village, spreading rumors and sowing discord among the villagers. He used their own fears and insecurities against them, turning them against one another. He had them believing that their suffering was a consequence of their own weakness, diverting their attention away from his own corruption. He manipulated the laws to his advantage, using the weight of the justice system to silence any dissent. Those who dared to speak against him were swiftly dealt with, their voices silenced forever. The villagers lived in constant fear, their spirits crushed under the weight of his oppressive rule. Chapter 5: Registered Fadaremia. In the midst of their misery, the villagers found solace in the teaching of a charismatic preacher named Father Remia. He preached a message of hope and redemption, promising a better life in the hereafter for those who followed his teachings. He offered a sanctuary from the harsh realities of their lives, promising a future
where their sufferings will be rewarded. However, Father Remia's sermon were not entirely based on faith and compassion. He saw the villagers' vulnerability as an opportunity to enrich himself. He exalted their desperation, demanding tithe and offering in exchange for promise of salvation. He convinced them to donate their meager possessions, their precious heirlooms, even their last penny, believing that they were contributing to a greater good. Under the guise of religious piety, Father Remia amassed a fortune. He built himself a lavish cathedral adorned with gold and precious gems, a stark contrast to the poverty that surrounded it. While he preached humility and sacrifice, he lived a life of luxury, feasting on the offerings of the impoverished villagers. Chapter 6: The Wealth of the Unborn. But Gebogena was not merely focused on his own wealth. He was determined to secure the future of his lineage. His grand plans extended far beyond his own lifetime. He dreamt of a dynasty that would dominate the land for generations to come. He amassed vast fortunes, not just for himself, but his children and grandchildren, ensuring that they would inherit his legacy of wealth and power. He spared no expense in providing for their education, their well-being, and their future. The villagers, meanwhile, struggled to feed their own children. Their meager earnings barely covered the cost of their basic needs. They watched with envy as Bat Gebogena's offspring lived lives of privilege and extravagance, while their own children toiled in the fields, their future uncertain and bleak. Chapter 7: Enough is Enough. Vinny, the impatient dog, had been watching all this unfold. He had witnessed the suffering of the villagers and the greed of the ruling class. His impatience, often seen as a flaw, proved to be a valued asset in this situation. While others waited for a savior, Vinny knew that waiting was a luxury he could not afford. He couldn't comprehend the complexities of politics, the machinations of power, the intricacies of religion. He was simply a dog, driven by the and a primal urge to survive. But in his own simple way, he understood that the time for patience was over. The villagers needed action, not empty promises. One day, Vinny decided to take matters into his own paws. He couldn't reason with the corrupt leaders, but he could disrupt their plans. He began by barking incessantly at Bat Gebogena's mansion, his persistent cries echoing throughout the village. Chapter 8: Something Unusual. The villagers, initially amused by Vinny's antics, began to notice a pattern. Whenever Vinny barked, something unusual happened. He would bark at the local tax collector, and the next day, taxes would be lowered. He would bark at Father Remia's cathedral, and the next day, the villagers would find stolen items returned to their homes. Vinny's impatience had inadvertently exposed the vulnerabilities of the ruling class. His relentless barking, though seemingly insignificant, had created a ripple effect, disrupting their carefully crafted plans. But Gebogena, used to dealing with complaint villagers, was baffled by Vinny's persistence. He tried to silence the dog, but Vinny could not be deterred. He barked louder, more persistently, his barks echoing throughout the village, uniting the people in shared frustration. As the pressure mounted, Bat Gebogena's carefully constructed wall began to crumble. The villagers, emboldened by Vinny's action, started demanding justice. They organized protests, chanting slogans against the Baron and his corrupt regime. Chapter 9: Catalyst for Change. The villagers, inspired by Vinny's courage and determination, finally broke free from the shackles of oppression. But Gebogena's power was diminished. His grip on the village weakened. He fled his mansion, his vast wealth abandoned, in his haste to escape the wrath of the people. Father Rona, realizing that his manipulation had been exposed, fled to a distant land. His stolen riches left behind. The villagers, no longer blinded by false promises, finally saw the truth. Vinny,
the impatient dog, became a symbol of hope and courage for the village. He had shown them that even the smallest act of defiance could have a significant impact. His impatience had ultimately led to the downfall of their oppressors and the triumph of the people. And in the end, the villagers learned that sometimes impatience could be the catalyst for change. Epilogue. With Bat Gebogena and Father Remia gone, the village began to heal. The oppressive weight that had long suffocated its inhabitants slowly lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and community. The villagers, once divided by fear and manipulation, now stood united, their spirits rekindled by the courage of a small dog whose impatience had sparked a revolution. Vinny became more than just a pet. He was a beloved symbol of resilience. Villagers adorned his collar with a small bell that jingled with every joyful leap he took. Children ran alongside him, laughing as he barked at the birds and chased after butterflies, embodying the spirit of freedom they had fought so hard to reclaim. As the village flourished, the people turned their focus to building a better future. They established a council to ensure that every voice was heard, a stark contrast to the silence that had once prevailed. No longer bound by the false promises of greed and manipulation, they learned to rely on one another, nurturing their community with kindness and cooperation. The once